Picture this, a high-rise boardroom at twilight, the skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. A man you once trusted, wealthy, charming, and powerful, stands alone by the glass, staring at the city below. Behind him, a door opens. A figure from his past steps in, wearing an authoritative grin that radiates triumph. Her eyes gleam with the satisfaction of one who has just seized the power he believed was his. This is not just any woman, but the same pregnant wife he once abandoned for a fling. Now she's returning with a vengeance and the entire board at her back. Daniel Everly used to believe his life was a masterpiece painted to perfection. Descended from old money, he carried himself with a regal confidence that turned heads wherever he went. The Everly name had graced society pages for decades, connected to philanthropic endeavors and powerful corporate alliances. From an early age, Daniel was told he was destined for greatness. He strutted confidently through the elite circles, always mindful of how to present the best version of himself. He met Catherine at Harvard Business School. Her intelligence stunned him before her beauty did. She had grown up in modest circumstances compared to Daniel's privilege, but she brought an unflagging work ethic and a calm resolve to everything she did. Catherine was the type of person who, when assigned a group project, naturally rose as the leader without ever announcing her intentions. Her quiet confidence was mesmerizing. She aced her courses, held a part-time job, and still found time to volunteer for organizations dedicated to women's empowerment. They married soon after graduation in a lavish ceremony at the Everly Estate in upstate New York. The press gushed about how perfect they seemed together. Daniel, the suave heir with an entrepreneurial spirit, and Catherine, the brilliant partner who tempered his impulsive nature. Over time, they built a life that looked as pristine on the outside as any Hollywood dream. The newlyweds launched a small investment startup, traveled internationally, and projected a sense of unstoppable upward momentum. When Catherine became pregnant, it felt like the final piece of their personal puzzle had fallen perfectly into place. They would have an heir to the Everly name, someone to carry on the legacy that had been entrusted to Daniel, and, by extension, to Catherine. They announced the pregnancy with carefully crafted grace, selecting a high-end magazine for an exclusive. Friends and well-wishers poured in their congratulations. Everything felt so secure, so right. Yet cracks form even on the most polished surfaces. As the months rolled on, the baby bump grew, and Catherine's priorities subtly shifted. No matter how supportive Daniel tried to be, a hint of restlessness took root in him. He started feeling overshadowed by the demands of fatherhood. His father had been a business titan who seldom engaged in the day-to-day aspects of family life, and Daniel found himself unconsciously mirroring that detachment. One afternoon, while attending a corporate symposium in London, Daniel scrolled through his phone, searching for a distraction. That's when he saw Cassandra's profile on a networking app. She was a venture capitalist with a knack for international deals. At least that's what her glowing bio said. Something about her photograph, her piercing green eyes, her assured posture kept him lingering on her page. Against his better judgment, he accepted her invitation to meet over coffee the next day. A few days later, he returned to New York, but his mind was still in London. Conversations with Cassandra had felt electric. She was bold, flirty, and had an almost mystical ability to make him feel like the sole object of her admiration. He tried to dismiss it as a harmless flirtation that would fade once he was back to normal life with Catherine. But he was wrong. The next time Cassandra visited New York for a conference, Daniel set aside an entire afternoon for her. He told Catherine he had business to handle, an investor meeting that required his utmost attention. She believed him, because up to that point, Daniel had given her no reason not to trust him. And so, in a five-star restaurant, hidden away in the corner of Manhattan, he and Cassandra raised their champagne flutes to a friendship that would soon become an all-consuming affair. The guilt began to nibble at the edges of his conscience, but he found ways to justify it. Catherine was always busy with prenatal appointments, baby shopping, and finalizing deals for their joint startup. She was often exhausted by evening, drifting off to sleep early. Meanwhile, Cassandra was spontaneous, alive with passion and an eagerness to push boundaries. He convinced himself he could keep both the stable married life with Catherine and the thrill of a clandestine liaison with Cassandra. But secrets are corrosive. They erode the mind until one day the lies you've strung together form a noose around your neck. Daniel had no clue that his carefully separated worlds would soon collide, obliterating the perfect facade he had spent his entire life constructing. Catherine began to notice the slight changes in Daniel's behavior first. He seemed more distant, more absorbed in his phone, and oddly fidgety whenever she entered the room unannounced. He started working late, more often using vague terms to describe big projects that never materialized into actual deals. When she asked him how the meeting went, he deflected, providing an avalanche of business jargon that sounded strangely hollow to her well-trained ear. At first, she chalked it up to nerves about impending fatherhood. After all, she felt her own anxieties skyrocketing daily. Their combined responsibilities, business, pregnancy, social obligations, were enough to wear down even the strongest relationship. But a gnawing doubt persisted. Her intuition told her something bigger was amiss. One evening, Catherine discovered a receipt in his jacket pocket from a small jewelry store in Manhattan. The date on the receipt was a day she knew Daniel was supposed to be in Boston for a business trip. She confronted him casually over dinner. "Honey, I found this in your pocket. Did you buy something special for the baby?" He froze his fork, hovering above his plate as though suspended in time. His eyes flickered with panic, but only for a millisecond. Then, with the smoothness of a seasoned deal-maker, he concocted a story about picking out a necklace for his mother. He insisted that his flight had been delayed, giving him time to roam Manhattan's shopping district. The explanation sounded plausible, yet Catherine's instincts remained on high alert. Catherine did what many pregnant spouses might do. She sought solace in the arms of her best friend, Evelyn Carlyle. Evelyn, a fellow Harvard alum, was well aware of the demands of corporate life. She also had a nose for deceit and a protective streak for those she loved. "I'm not crazy, right?" Catherine whispered over the phone. "I can't be making all this up in my head." "Of course you're not crazy," Evelyn replied, her voice laced with fury at Daniel's potential betrayal. "We'll figure this out." It wasn't long before Evelyn's social connections alerted her to rumors about Daniel's indiscretions. Wealthy circles are surprisingly small, and gossip travels at the speed of light. A friend of a friend had supposedly seen Daniel at a high-end restaurant cozying up to a woman who certainly wasn't Catherine. The woman was described as striking long dark hair, an air of mystery about her. "Does the name Cassandra ring a bell?" Evelyn asked quietly over another phone call. The question sent a jolt through Catherine. She recalled Daniel mentioning a Cassandra in passing, a new investor he met at a conference. He spoke glowingly of her entrepreneurial prowess, but had always been vague about their interactions. The pieces were starting to come together, albeit in the most painful way imaginable. One fateful night, Catherine decided to confront him directly. She waited until he stumbled in past midnight, reeking of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. She stood in the living room, her round belly, a potent reminder of the future they were supposed to be sharing. "Daniel," she said softly, "we need to talk. Please, don't lie to me." His eyes flicked from the baby bump to her resolute stare. He tried to speak, but words failed him. Seeing the tears already brimming in her eyes, he realized the time for deception was over. Slowly, haltingly, he confessed to his affair with Cassandra. He insisted it was just physical, a momentary lapse. He swore he'd end it immediately. Catherine was beyond devastated. She felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her, leaving her free-falling into a dark abyss. The heartbreak was searing, and her unborn child fluttered inside her, a reminder that she had to think beyond her own pain. She insisted Daniel move out temporarily. She needed space to grapple with this betrayal and to protect her mental health during the final stages of her pregnancy. For a moment, Daniel seemed remorseful, torn between his responsibilities as a husband and father and the magnetic pull of Cassandra's allure. But as soon as he stepped out of their home, it was Cassandra to whom he ran. She welcomed him with open arms, offering comfort, passion, and what he perceived as unconditional acceptance. Thus began a tragic separation. Catherine moved in with Evelyn, who provided emotional support and ensured her friend didn't slip into despair. Daniel, on the other hand, sank deeper into Cassandra's world, private jet excursions, glamorous parties, and a liberating sense of escape from the stifling responsibilities that came with fatherhood. He told himself this was temporary, that he'd make things right someday. But each day that passed only deepened the gulf between him and Catherine. Still unknown to both Daniel and Cassandra, fate had plans of its own. The secrets they were weaving would circle back at the least expected moment, bringing consequences far greater than any of them could imagine. A few months later, the rumor mill exploded. It started with a scathing blog post by an anonymous insider close to the Everly family. The post detailed Daniel's affair, the heartbreak of a pregnant wife, and the lavish lifestyle he was living with his mistress. Within hours, it went viral across multiple social media platforms. Tabloids pounced on the story, plastering it across front pages with headlines like, "Heir to Everly Fortune abandons pregnant wife for mystery lover." Catherine's phone rang off the hook. Reporters camped outside her temporary apartment. Paparazzi followed her to doctor's appointments, shouting intrusive questions about Daniel's infidelity. She did her best to ignore them, focusing on her health and the child she was about to bring into the world. Her own family was furious with Daniel, urging her to seek a divorce. They wanted her to protect herself and the baby, physically and legally. Daniel, meanwhile, reveled in the infamy at first. Cassandra spun the scandal in a way that made him feel like a misunderstood rebel. She fed him lines about forging his own destiny away from the suffocating expectations of his family. But soon, the negative press began to affect his business ventures. Investors pulled out of deals, uncertain about the stability of Everly Enterprises. Even some of Daniel's oldest allies distanced themselves. Reputation means everything in the corporate world, and Daniel's was becoming radioactive. Desperate to control the narrative, Daniel hired a high-profile PR firm run by a certain James Caldwell, a veteran consultant rumored to have handled image crises for Warren Buffett and Mark Cuban in the past. Caldwell recommended that Daniel go on a media offensive, painting himself as someone who made a human mistake. But in every TV interview, Daniel's answers felt contrived and self-serving. Public sympathy stayed firmly with Catherine, the abandoned pregnant wife. Things escalated when Catherine's water broke unexpectedly one morning. She had to push through a throng of reporters just to get into a cab. Panic gripped her. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, and she was still reeling from the emotional toll of Daniel's betrayal. Evelyn stayed by her side, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. They rushed to the hospital amid flashing camera lights and shouting journalists. While Catherine struggled through labor, Daniel was nowhere to be found. He was in the Hamptons at Cassandra's summer home, nursing a hangover and ignoring his phone. When he finally checked his messages hours later, he discovered a deluge of missed calls from Evelyn and Catherine's parents. By the time he arrived at the hospital, their daughter Isabel Everly had already been born. Catherine refused to see him. Evelyn served as a gatekeeper, demanding that Daniel leave. Feeling guilty, yet indignant, he shouted at Evelyn, blaming her for turning Catherine against him. The hospital corridor turned into a stage for a public shouting match that had onlookers gasping. Eventually, security intervened, ushering Daniel outside. He stood in the drizzling rain, grappling with the gravity of what he'd done. He had missed the birth of his own child. For a few days, Daniel spiraled. He drowned himself in alcohol, ignoring calls from his family and business associates. Cassandra tried to comfort him, but her brand of solace felt hollow. He was forced to confront a painful truth. The baby's arrival had changed everything. No matter how entangled he was with Cassandra, a part of him yearned to hold his daughter, to be there for those first precious moments of her life. Still, the memory of Catherine's devastated face and the reality of public scorn kept him away. He convinced himself that time would heal the wounds, that eventually he'd patch things up with Catherine and co-parent. But he had no idea how drastically the power dynamics would shift in her favor, or how determined Catherine was becoming to forge a new path on her own terms. In the weeks following Isabel's birth, Catherine found herself propelled by a fierce maternal instinct. She was determined not to let heartbreak consume her. With Evelyn's unwavering support, she threw herself into caring for her newborn and salvaging the business ventures she had built alongside Daniel. She recognized that Everly Enterprises might be lost to Daniel's reckless decisions and tarnished name, but she still had her own entrepreneurial spirit and formidable network from Harvard. While Daniel spiraled, Catherine quietly orchestrated moves that would secure her financial independence. She reconnected with former classmates and professors, exploring new opportunities. One of her mentors at Harvard, Professor Amelia Thompson, was known for investing in promising women-led startups. Upon hearing Catherine's plight, Amelia offered a partnership that would provide capital for a new venture focusing on women's healthcare products, an idea Catherine had been toying with ever since she discovered the flaws in prenatal care during her own pregnancy. In parallel, Catherine's relationship with the Everly family board took an unexpected turn. Her father-in-law, Richard Everly, was furious with Daniel for disgracing the family name. He had always admired Catherine's poise and intellect, believing she was the stabilizing force Daniel needed. After seeing how callously Daniel had treated her, Richard discreetly reached out to Catherine. He apologized on behalf of the family and confided that he no longer trusted Daniel to make sound decisions for the Everly empire. "If you're open to it," he said, voice laden with sorrow, "I'd like to appoint you to the board of Everly Enterprises. This is not about taking sides or humiliating Daniel. It's about protecting what our family has built for generations. Your insights and integrity could be exactly what we need to set the company back on the right path." It was an offer Catherine couldn't ignore. She saw it as a chance not only to safeguard her daughter's future, but also to assert her own worth. Until now, she had always been the supportive wife to Daniel, overshadowed by his flamboyant presence. This was her moment to shine on her own. After consulting with her legal team, who pointed out Daniel could challenge the move, but would likely fail given the board's consensus, she accepted. Overnight headlines shifted from pitying Catherine to lauding her resilience. Tabloids ran stories on her quiet strength, framing her as the woman scorned who had risen above adversity. Business analysts praised her appointment, noting that she had an impeccable track record at Harvard Business School and had co-founded successful ventures with Daniel, making her more than qualified. In corporate circles, talk of her becoming a fresh face on the board excited those tired of Daniel's negative publicity. Daniel, meanwhile, was late to learn of this development. As usual, he was entrenched in Cassandra's lavish escapades and the occasional half-baked attempt at regaining investor confidence. When news reached him that Catherine now held a pivotal seat at Everly Enterprises, he was livid. He stormed into his father's office, demanding an explanation. "I'm the heir," Daniel shouted, fists clenched. "How could you do this without even consulting me?" Richard Everly's stare was steely. "Because your actions have jeopardized this family's legacy, Daniel. Until you can prove you're capable of leading responsibly, you should be grateful you still hold any shares at all." Catherine is a breath of fresh air, and frankly, the board has more faith in her judgment right now. Daniel left the office feeling betrayed by his own father, oblivious to the irony that he himself had betrayed the woman who was now stepping in to save the family business. The idea that Catherine could be more influential than him at Everly Enterprises was unthinkable. His pride was bruised, and he blamed her for stealing what should rightfully be his. Catherine, for her part, remained poised. She told herself that this wasn't about revenge. Yes, there was satisfaction in knowing she had a seat at the table where Daniel once reigned, but she was also resolute in her mission to ensure that her daughter's inheritance was protected and to steer the company into a more ethical, responsible future. In private, she wrestled with emotional wounds that had yet to fully heal. Late at night, after putting Isabel to sleep, she would stare at the family photos from happier times. She didn't hate Daniel. A part of her still cared for the man she thought he was, but she couldn't allow those feelings to hold her back. Not anymore. As Catherine consolidated her new role, Cassandra realized her carefree fling with Daniel was entering turbulent waters. The scandalous headlines were no longer glorifying their passion. Instead, she found herself painted as the villain who wrecked a marriage. Corporate investors, once charmed by her bold approach, became wary of associating with someone mired in such public drama. But Cassandra was no novice. She had survived in a cutthroat business world through a combination of cunning and relentless ambition. Seeing Catherine's star rise, Cassandra recognized that if she wanted to remain relevant and profitable, she needed to up her game. She started courting new alliances, forging deals in Europe and Asia, and flirting with high-profile executives who could rival the Everly empire. She believed that if she couldn't be part of the Everly family business, she could at least create a competitive empire that would force them to reckon with her. Daniel found himself caught in the middle. Cassandra urged him to distance himself from his father and from Catherine. She offered to back any new venture he wanted to pursue, promising he'd have more freedom than he ever did under the Everly umbrella. "They're all using you for your name, Daniel," she insisted. "With me, you can chart your own course." Yet each time he tried to sever ties with Everly Enterprises, something tugged at him, a sense of belonging, of familial duty. For all his faults, Daniel still wanted to prove himself worthy of the Everly legacy. He also couldn't shake the fact that Catherine now had the ear of the board. He hated the idea that she might be overshadowing him, deciding the company's direction without his input. Still under Cassandra's persuasion, Daniel took a leap. He announced he was starting a new venture capital firm aimed at disruptive technologies, Everly Venture Partners. He tried to leverage the Everly name without the board's permission, which promptly led to a legal battle. The board, guided by Catherine and Richard Everly, contended that Daniel had no right to use the Everly brand for a business outside the family's scope. This dispute quickly escalated and became fodder for more sensational headlines. Cassandra saw an opening. She pumped a significant amount of her own funds acquired from various shady deals into Daniel's new firm, hoping to pressure the board into negotiation. But Catherine held firm. Through hours of mediation and strategic press releases, she made it clear that Daniel was free to pursue any venture he wished, but not under the Everly trademark. Eventually, the courts sided with the board, forcing Daniel to rename his fledgling firm. He settled on D. Everly Ventures, a lackluster compromise that grated on his ego. Undeterred, Cassandra convinced Daniel to move into a luxury penthouse in the heart of Manhattan. They hosted lavish fundraisers, aiming to attract wealthy backers. Behind the scenes, however, cracks were forming in their relationship. Cassandra was keenly aware that Daniel's attention kept drifting back to Catherine and the child he had barely seen. At times, Daniel would vanish for hours, parked outside the house where Catherine and Isabel lived, yearning for a chance to glimpse his daughter. He never worked up the courage to knock on the door. Inevitably, tensions between Daniel and Cassandra soared. She belittled him for his indecision, scolding him for not focusing on their business empire. He accused her of using him as a stepping stone for her own ambitions. Their once passionate romance devolved into shouting matches in gilded rooms, with neither party willing to acknowledge that the relationship had become toxic. All the while, Catherine quietly gathered respect in board meetings. She spearheaded new initiatives in sustainable energy, a passion project she'd been nursing for years, and worked on philanthropic endeavors to reclaim some of the goodwill lost to Daniel's scandal. Employees admired her for her work ethic and her genuine concern for corporate responsibility. Profits started to rebound as investors, seeing a stable and visionary leadership, returned to the Everly fold. What none of them knew was that the biggest twist was yet to come. A shift in legal documents, combined with a revelation from Richard Everly's personal attorney, would soon upend the balance of power once more, and it would force Daniel, Cassandra, and Catherine to face the fallout of their choices. The Everly empire was more than just a conglomerate of businesses. It was also a labyrinth of legal structures, trusts, and carefully placed investments. The patriarch Richard Everly had always been meticulous in ensuring that the family legacy was protected from errant heirs or hostile takeovers. One afternoon, as Catherine waded through financial statements in the boardroom, she was handed a sealed envelope from the family's personal attorney, a man named Michael Addison, who had a long history with the Everly dynasty. Inside were documents revealing that a substantial portion of Everly Enterprises' shares had been placed in a trust under Richard's name, with the power to reassign them at his discretion. In the event that the heir Daniel proved unfit or unethical to lead, those shares could be transferred. The documents, signed years ago, showed that Richard was seriously considering exercising this power if Daniel did not reform his ways. Catherine's heart pounded as she read further. A signature line indicated that Richard could name a primary custodian or beneficiary to manage the shares in his stead. And in handwriting that looked fresh, not old, she saw her own name. She would hold a critical block of shares, enough to dictate the direction of the entire board, enough to control the future of Everly Enterprises. When she confronted Richard, he sighed heavily and led her into his private study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves surrounded them, containing records of the family's storied history. Daniel's reckless behavior jeopardizes everything, he explained, eyes downcast. I still love my son, but I must think about Isabel and generations to come. Your intelligence and moral compass are beyond question. If Daniel can't redeem himself, I need to know the company is in good hands. Catherine was stunned. She realized that the power Richard was offering was extraordinary. If she chose to wield it, she could effectively remove Daniel from any leadership role, overshadowing him entirely. However, the very thought made her uneasy. Despite everything he had done, Daniel was still Isabel's father, and she knew that wielding such power against him would only deepen the family rift. Yet the decision was not hers alone. Richard insisted that if Daniel didn't show significant improvement by divorcing Cassandra, rehabilitating his public image, and taking fatherhood seriously, he would transfer the shares to Catherine outright. Meanwhile, word reached Cassandra that changes were afoot. She heard whispers that Catherine was poised to gain significant influence over the board. Fear gripped her. If Catherine held that many shares, Daniel would be neutered as a business force. Cassandra worried that her own investments in Everly Ventures would crumble if Daniel was cut off from the Everly capital stream. Determined not to lose her golden ticket, Cassandra hatched a plan. She began orchestrating a personal smear campaign against Catherine, feeding tabloids fabricated stories about Catherine's past relationships and questionable business dealings. She even tried to bribe employees at Everly Enterprises to leak internal emails that could be taken out of context, painting Catherine as manipulative. But the employees were fiercely loyal to Catherine, and the attempt largely failed. At the same time, Cassandra launched an all-out charm offensive on Richard Everly. She mailed expensive gifts to his mansion, expressed sudden interest in philanthropy, aligned with his favorite charities, and managed to wrangle an invitation to a high society gala he was attending. She cornered him in a conversation about corporate social responsibility, trying to appear sympathetic to the Everly family's philanthropic ethos. But Richard saw through it. He understood Cassandra's motives, and while he remained civil, he made it clear that she had no place in the Everly future he envisioned. "Keep your gifts," he told her in a clipped tone at the gala. "We measure loyalty and character in this family, not champagne bottles." Daniel, caught between the crossfire, struggled to keep up appearances. He held private meetings with Richard, begging for another chance. "I'll leave Cassandra," he insisted, even though he'd said those words before. "I just need time to sort things out." Time was running short. Catherine, by now, was regularly attending board meetings, proving her leadership abilities. Even the oldest board members, who had once favored Daniel, purely because of his bloodline, found themselves impressed by Catherine's vision and strategic thinking. Talk began to circulate that if Richard officially passed down the shares to her, she would become the de facto head of Everly Enterprises, overshadowing Daniel once and for all. And so the stage was set. The final battle for the soul of the Everly Empire and the hearts of those involved drew near. Unbeknownst to Daniel and Cassandra, Catherine was about to be handed a pen that could either sign a path of reconciliation or a permanent break. Tensions peaked on a warm summer evening at the Everly estate, where Richard insisted on hosting a family gathering for Isabel's first birthday. Family in this case included Daniel Catherine, their baby Richard, and a few cousins who had stayed loyal through the scandal. Despite the hostility, everyone understood the significance of Isabel's first birthday, symbolic of a new generation and a chance, however slim, at healing old wounds. Catherine arrived early, with Isabel in her arms. The staff had decorated the manicured gardens with pastel balloons and ribbons, all bearing the Everly crest. Soft music played from hidden speakers among the rose bushes. Against her better judgment, Catherine felt a flicker of nostalgia. She remembered happier days with Daniel in this very garden, planning a future that now seemed so different from what had unfolded. Daniel showed up late, unshaven, and visibly anxious. He was alone. Cassandra, by some unspoken understanding, was not welcome. At first, he hesitated at the threshold, uncertain if he should even be here. But the sight of Isabel's chubby cheeks and wide eyes disarmed him. He approached, tentatively bracing for Catherine's rebuff. Yet Catherine merely looked at him with a sad gentleness. "She's your daughter, Daniel," she said, handing Isabel over. Isabel studied her father's face curiously before giggling. The moment was heart-wrenchingly pure, contrasting sharply with the complicated mess they'd made of their adult lives. As the party proceeded, Richard stood to make a toast. Glass in hand, he addressed the intimate gathering, praising Catherine's resilience and welcoming everyone to celebrate Isabel's milestone. Then, in a carefully orchestrated pivot, he made an announcement that would change everything. "I've reflected long and hard on the future of our family's legacy," Richard began, voice shaking slightly. "And I've come to a decision. Should Daniel not break ties with Cassandra and show immediate commitment to this family, I will legally reassign a majority of my shares to Catherine. This is not a punishment, but a necessity for the preservation of all we hold dear." A stunned silence ensued. All eyes landed on Daniel. The shock on his face was palpable, though perhaps not entirely unexpected. The hush broke when Daniel slammed his champagne glass onto the nearest table shards, scattering across the pristine tablecloth. "This is how you repay me," he spat, glaring at his father and then at Catherine. His cheeks reddened with anger, tears threatening to break through. "You think I don't care about my daughter? You think I'm incapable of change?" Everyone looked away, awkwardly, except Catherine. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Isabel's head. "It's not about what I think," she said softly. "It's about what you've shown us. I begged you to come home to be here for Isabel's birth. You chose Cassandra, and now we're all paying the price." Daniel trembled with a mixture of rage and regret. Emotions collided in his mind: love for his child, resentment toward Catherine, guilt over his affair, and the fear of losing everything he'd ever known. He turned to his father, voice quivering. "You can't do this to me. I'm your son." Richard sighed, as though the weight of the entire world pressed on his shoulders. "I can, and I will, Daniel. I want to see you succeed, but not at the cost of this family's soul." Turning on his heel, Daniel stormed off, ignoring the pleas of cousins who tried to calm him. Catherine closed her eyes, holding Isabel close, heart pounding with conflicting emotions. That night, Daniel confronted Cassandra in the penthouse, a roar in his voice. "It's over," he declared. "If I don't leave you, my father will sign everything over to Catherine. I'll be left with nothing. Do you understand what that means?" Cassandra, who had been sipping wine on the leather sofa, placed her glass down carefully. "You'll be left with nothing. Or you'll be left with me." Her eyes narrowed in anger. She rose to her feet, stepping toward him. "I gave up everything to be with you, Daniel. My reputation, my connections. I even poured millions into your new firm. And now you want to throw me away just because Daddy threatened you? Daniel pulled at his hair in frustration. I never asked you to do all that, he muttered. Look, I need time to figure this out. Cassandra's voice turned icy. Time is something you don't have. Choose right here, right now. In that moment, Daniel finally saw the truth. Cassandra's love was contingent on his success on the power he wielded. Catherine, on the other hand, had always been the silent champion who stood by him through thick and thin. He realized how grotesquely he'd betrayed that kind of love. But as often happens with tragic figures, realization came too late. His indecision enraged Cassandra. She lashed out, accusing him of cowardice and painting Catherine as the master manipulator. They yelled until exhaustion, neither side willing to back down. In the early hours of the morning, Cassandra packed her bags and walked out, slamming the door behind her. For once, Daniel let her go without chasing after her. In the weeks that followed, Daniel attempted to make amends, but his efforts were clumsy. He sent expensive gifts to Catherine, tried to schedule visits with Isabel, and offered to attend family therapy. Catherine hesitated, torn between the man who was Isabel's father and the man who had shattered her trust. Despite her emotional turmoil, she had a corporate empire to guide. The board was pressuring Richard to make a definitive decision about the share transfer. The final blow came when Cassandra, in a fit of vengeance, sold her insider knowledge to a competitor. She provided details about Daniel's prospective venture deals, effectively killing off any potential partnerships. Investors fled, and within a month, D. Everly Ventures was on the brink of collapse. Ironically, Daniel's attempt to strike out on his own had left him more dependent on his father's mercy than ever. With Cassandra out of the picture, Daniel's public image marginally improved, but the damage was done. The board saw him as unstable. They wanted reassurance in the form of a strong leader, someone who wouldn't be swayed by personal scandals. Richard, after observing Daniel's self-destruction with heavy heart, finally made the call. One chilly autumn afternoon in the same boardroom that once belonged squarely to Daniel's domain, Richard signed the documents granting Catherine control over a substantial block of Everly shares. Several board members were present, along with Michael Addison, the family's attorney, to witness the official transfer. The moment Richard's pen lifted from the paper, a hush settled over the room. Catherine was now the second most powerful person in Everly Enterprises, just behind Richard himself. But even that dynamic was tenuous, as Richard's intention was to eventually cede most of his authority to her. Daniel was conspicuously absent from the meeting, though he had been informed of it. Michael Addison slid the final copy of the paperwork toward Catherine. "Congratulations, Mrs. Everly," he said, a note of solemn respect in his voice. "With these shares, you effectively control the deciding vote on corporate matters." Catherine felt an odd mixture of triumph and sorrow. She recalled the days when she and Daniel had dreamed of being a power couple, leading Everly Enterprises to new heights. Instead, here she was alone. She forced a polite smile and shook hands with the board members, each offering quiet congratulations tinged with pity for the personal battles she had endured. After the meeting, she retreated to her new office, a space that had once been Daniel's. She stood by the large windows, gazing at the skyline. The city that had once felt like a place of infinite possibilities now felt subdued, a testament to the cost of ambition and betrayal. A soft knock at the door startled her. She turned to see Daniel looking haggard but determined. He stepped inside cautiously. "So it's done," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, unsure of what to say. They stood in silence for a long moment, the tension heavy between them. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I know you have every reason to hate me, but I'm here for Isabel. I want to be part of her life, Catherine. Please don't shut me out." Catherine studied him. This was not the arrogant, carefree Daniel she once knew. This was a man stripped bare by his own mistakes. She took a deep breath, remembering the hospital room, where he was absent, the lonely nights, the public humiliation. Yet for all his flaws, he was still Isabel's father, and she didn't want her daughter growing up without him. "I won't shut you out," she said quietly, "but rebuilding trust will take time. If you're serious, you'll have to prove it." Daniel let out a shaky breath of relief. "I will. I promise." But promises were cheap. Catherine had heard them before. The difference now was that she held the reins of power. She could protect herself and Isabel from the chaos Daniel brought. And with that responsibility came a burden, the knowledge that she had the upper hand and the moral question of how to wield it. Under Catherine's leadership, Everly Enterprises began to pivot toward more progressive, transparent business practices. Sustainability and ethical governance became their calling cards. The public responded positively, with major publications praising the new era at Everly. Investors returned and profits steadied. Realizing that a path to redemption lay in supporting Catherine's vision, Daniel began attending corporate events and philanthropic fundraisers carefully orchestrated by the PR firm James Caldwell still operated. Instead of hogging the spotlight, Daniel took a back seat, letting Catherine's expertise shine. He made efforts to show he was a responsible father, as well requesting regular visitation with Isabel, paying child support without question, and showing up at her pediatric checkups. Gradually, a narrative of redemption formed around Daniel. Tabloids that once vilified him for abandoning his pregnant wife now hinted at a possible family reconciliation. Pictures of Daniel holding Isabel at a charity event tugged at public heartstrings. Gossip columns speculated about whether Catherine might take him back. Friends and colleagues whispered that perhaps Daniel had finally learned his lesson. Catherine, however, maintained a clear boundary. While she appreciated Daniel's new attitude, she remained cautious. She allowed him to share parenting duties, but refused any romantic overtures. Even if Daniel's remorse was genuine, the scars ran deep, and she couldn't risk a second betrayal. If a reconciliation was to happen, it would require more than a PR facelift. Behind the scenes, Cassandra seethed. Financially ruined and socially ostracized, she blamed Catherine for her downfall. Her last desperate move was to try to blackmail Daniel using private recordings of their intimate moments and business conversations. She threatened to release them to the media unless he paid a hefty sum to bail out her failing ventures. Horrified, Daniel confided in Catherine and Richard. They quickly involved Michael Addison, who issued Cassandra a strongly worded legal warning. The threat fizzled, but the episode reminded everyone how dangerous Cassandra could be. The board, for its part, stood staunchly behind Catherine. Even those who had initially viewed her as an outsider respected her aptitude for crisis management. An important corporate lawyer affiliated with Everly Enterprises told a journalist off the record, "Catherine Everly has done more to restore confidence in the family brand than any heir in recent memory. Her leadership is exactly what Everly needed." With Daniel's public image stabilizing, the question loomed, would Richard pass the baton fully to Catherine, or would he give Daniel one last chance? As Isabel approached her second birthday, Richard summoned both Catherine and Daniel to a private meeting in his study, a place that had become a crucible for so many pivotal family decisions. Richard stood behind his oak desk, hands clasped, shoulders weighted by the choices he had to make. Catherine sat in a high back chair to the left, Daniel to the right, mirroring the tension that still lingered between them. "You both know I won't be here forever," Richard began. "My hope was always that you, Daniel, would assume control of our legacy, but life has a way of reshaping our plans. You and Catherine need to figure out a path forward for Isabel's sake and for Everly Enterprises." He gestured to a folder resting on the desk. "Inside are documents that finalize the transfer of all my remaining shares. I've made my decision. I'm retiring. Catherine will assume full leadership. Daniel, you'll retain a minority share enough to keep you involved, but not enough to override board decisions. This isn't negotiable." Daniel hung his head, a swirl of emotions crossing his face. Regret, resignation, and perhaps a glimmer of acceptance. He nodded. "I understand." Catherine's heart pounded. She had prepared herself for this possibility, but the magnitude of controlling an entire family empire was terrifying. She wanted to look Daniel in the eye to see if he would fight her or resent her. Instead, she found him staring at the floor, lost in thought. "I won't stand in the way," Daniel said, his voice subdued. "I've done enough damage. You've more than proven your abilities. I just want to be a good father to Isabel." Catherine swallowed hard. This was the moment that would define their future dynamic. She rose from her chair and spoke carefully. "Daniel, Everly Enterprises can be our family's legacy if we allow it to unite us rather than divide us. I may hold the majority of shares, but I don't want you to vanish from Isabel's life or from the company if you truly wish to contribute." Richard watched them both, pride swelling in his chest. Perhaps he thought there was hope for reconciliation down the line, if not as husband and wife, then as partners in parenting and business. Without another word, he signed the documents that forever changed the balance of power. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the estate's manicured lawns. Catherine gripped the folder containing her new empire, feeling a bittersweet mixture of triumph and loss. Daniel approached her hesitantly. "Thank you," he said, voice husky, "for not shutting me out." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Don't thank me. Just prove you deserve the trust." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their past heartbreak pulsing between them. Finally, Daniel extended a hand. Catherine met it, and they shared a brief, solemn handshake, a gesture that felt more final than any wedding vow they'd exchanged. 6 months passed, and the world saw an Everly Enterprises transformed. Catherine's leadership spurred an era of transparency and innovation. She appointed a diverse team of executives, championed eco-friendly initiatives, and invested in community programs. The media labeled her the visionary of corporate renewal. Daniel, meanwhile, found a measure of solace. Freed from Cassandra's manipulative grip and no longer burdened by the weight of a public scandal, he focused on self-improvement. He sought therapy to address the root causes of his restlessness and infidelity. He even volunteered at community centers, drawing on his experience to mentor youth who needed guidance. With time and therapy, Daniel and Catherine found a workable, co-parenting relationship. Every weekend, Daniel took Isabel to the park, pushing her on swings and introducing her to the simplest of joys. Sometimes Catherine joined them, and while the atmosphere was not free of tension, a cooperative spirit prevailed. At board meetings, Daniel participated in discussions, but deferred to Catherine's final judgment. He recognized that she possessed the level-headed strategy and ethical grounding that Everly Enterprises needed. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt a sense of relief at not being the sole heir expected to carry the family's fortunes. The pressure was gone, and with it some of the arrogance that had plagued him. He was learning to find dignity in contributing rather than dominating. Across town, Cassandra tried one last gambit to resurrect her fortunes. She staged a press conference claiming she had been a victim in the entire ordeal. But the public had moved on, uninterested in her elaborate self-justifications. Investors saw no merit in her new ventures. In the end, she packed her things and left for a quieter life, abroad, haunted by her own ambition. Catherine thrived, though not without challenges. Balancing single motherhood with running a corporate empire demanded every ounce of her energy and intellect. She discovered new depths to her fortitude, calling on her friends, especially Evelyn Carlyle, for support. Nights were long, and mornings came too early, but the sight of Isabel's smiling face gave her strength. When doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the hardships she'd faced and the responsibilities she now carried. In those moments, she felt an unbreakable resolve blossom within her, and in the corners of her heart, Catherine harbored a cautious hope. She didn't see a romantic reunion with Daniel on the horizon. Too much had happened for that. But she did see a future where Isabel would grow up with two caring parents. Perhaps one day, she and Daniel might truly be friends. For now, she was content to let the scars of the past heal at their own pace. On a warm spring afternoon, Catherine stood in the same boardroom where she had first been given the seat of power. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sprawling city below. New interns bustled in the hallways, enamored with the storied Everly name and the woman who had revitalized it. Staring at the panoramic skyline, Catherine allowed herself a small, grateful smile. She had fought for her dignity, rebuilt her life, and secured a legacy for her child. Far below, Daniel walked out of the building, Isabel perched on his shoulders, giggling at the skyscrapers that seemed to tickle the clouds. As father and daughter passed by onlookers, no one recognized the man who had once been at the center of a sensational scandal. He was simply Dad carrying his child as she squealed with delight, and that Daniel realized was worth more than all the fortune and fame he had once craved. In the end, Catherine stood where few expected her to be, at the helm of a mighty empire. Daniel began anew, building a life free from the shadows of betrayal and regret. And through it all, Isabel grew in a world shaped by both parents, one who had learned the power of loyalty the hard way, and another who had come into her power with grace. Their story wasn't neat or perfect, but in its messy reality, there was genuine hope for something better. And in that hope lay the redemption they all sought. This story stands as a vivid reminder that power isn't just about titles or boardroom votes. It's about integrity, resilience, and the choices we make under pressure. Daniel thought he could have it all: wealth, status, and a secret mistress, but fate taught him a lesson about what truly matters. Catherine might have seemed like the underdog, but her quiet strength and moral compass led her to triumph and protect the legacy for her daughter's future. If you found yourself swept away by this tale of betrayal, ambition, and redemption, don't let the journey end here. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories that dig deep into the human condition. Every share helps us bring you more drama, more lessons, and more hope in life's toughest moments. Until next time, remember, true power is rooted in character, and redemption is always possible.